It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'd like to obviously mirror what the Vice-Chancellor just said. Not being a full member of the university anymore, it's a very exciting, sounds like it's going to be a very exciting place to be. Just in bearing in mind the comments that the Vice-Chancellor just made, I found this as a quote from the website this morning. It was looking at and exploring the problems that the universities themselves will have to engage in. And we can see here that for me, those multiple trades, those multiple realities, those multiple skills are not simply a blending together of individual skills. They need a radical change, a radical shift in the ways in which we understand who we are, what we are, and what knowledge actually means in these issues. And so I can see that transdisciplinarity is central to the ways in which we address these bigger pressing problems and addressed in a completely different way. The slide here gives you an idea of how interdisciplinary, it was too difficult to find enough academic papers on transdisciplinary publications have grown. It's quite clearly the issue of single disciplines has not met some of the challenges this world presents to us. I think on a recent count, there were something like 8,000 new disciplines. And this is really somewhat of a growth from the 4 disciplines which were embedded in the University of Paris when it first started in engaging in its higher education scholarship. You also see, and on both the left and right hand side, are 2 famous philosophers, both of which share, I use those basically because they both share an interest in philosophical anthropology. And that was, I doff my hat to Kate on that. Heidegger is probably the last significant German philosopher to discuss the fine sciences. For him, the fine sciences are those that are related to the transcendentals, related to our understanding what is good, beautiful, and truth. And on the right-hand side, we have Immanuel Kant, who was much more interested in the higher sciences. And these are the sciences that take their meaning from a scientific method. In his critique of judgment, he argued that it was only those sciences, only that knowledge which could be revealed through a scientific method, which should be justifiable. So we have both the beginning there of separating out value from our understanding, our epistemology, and actually arguing that for an expertise in a particular area. So that's a kind of, I think, a grounding of where we are. How things have explored, we saw the graph previously about how academic publications have increased. These books in front of you are the books that I just took down from Amazon that have been published the first 6 months of this year. So the interest in transdisciplinarity is enormous. One of the problems is that they all tend to be grounded still within a particular focus. And so this transdisciplinarity is only a methodology. It isn't a broader way of engaging with the world. And I'll just have a few words with you in a second about that. Because if we look here, where that, and I'll explain very briefly who these people are, that there is a transdisciplinarity in and of itself is spread and has different kind of approaches to the subject. On the left-hand side is Bazarab Nicolescu, who takes a much more broader and philosophical approach towards transdisciplinarity. We've been fortunate enough to have Bazarab attend with us at the university. And then moving from Bazarab, we move through to Julie Thompson-Klein. She's an American transdisciplinarian, mainly though, linking together notions of disciplines and how we can cross borders and interrelate in multidisciplinarity. So you have on the one side a European model, which is much more holistic, much more philosophical, and a much more pragmatic American model. Sitting somewhere between those is Christian Pohl. Christian Pohl is probably one of the nicest men I've met, and is an important contributor to sustainable education and sustainable sciences. So we've got, and Christian Pohl is Swiss, Niculescu is Romanian, and Maria de Mello is a significant intellect in transdisciplinarity, and she works from Brazil and around the world. And then clearly the cutting edge work, which is being done by Kate, warrants her place amongst those other leaders of transdisciplinarity. What we have is those two kind of views can be, I think, illustrated in these two bullet point slides, or parts of a slide. There's the integration of knowledge, which I think the Vice Chancellor was implying, which is how the definition of concepts and theoretical frameworks are constructed from taking different disciplines, how we then formulate research questions and hypotheses which straddle those different disciplines. Then there's a development of an integrative approach, the design of assessment procedures, and the creation of mutual understanding across disciplines. All of that seems to me to be taking a step forward, but not a leap. It isn't a disjunct from our knowledge that and epistemological models that we still hold. I'm not arguing they're not valid, but I'm saying they're not good enough. And then we move to Homo Sui Transcendentalis, which is the approach that Niculescu and others would take, which is about the praxis of being. It's not about theory and practice, it's about theory in practice. It's about the substance that transdisciplinarity and all disciplines need to be reconsidered. It's like transdisciplinarity is the core, it's the substance from which the disciplines come. It isn't the gap between disciplines. Its revelations are based on uncertainty and complexity. It enables us to satisfactorily understand and act, but often not to know. And I think that's one of the things that we need to embrace in our own way in which we react, is that not all is knowable or revealable to us, and it can trouble our acceptance of others. So there we've got the kind of international views, the international leaders, they can cluster around those two camps of transdisciplinarity, and they do that through a huge number of activities. I've only listed a few here that came to mind fairly recently, but you can see that transdisciplinarity has centers and hubs across the world. Austria is particularly relevant for sustainability. Australia is the work of the UTS in Australia is about creative design and design products. Hong Kong has a very high understanding and relationship to transdisciplinary education. Romania, where Bazarab is professor, has a very interesting approach, and it looks at how transdisciplinarity and theology and spirituality can work together. Switzerland, we saw with Christian Pohl, does tend to focus on sustainability studies, which is a critical and common theme from all of these centers. Middlesex just does everything wonderfully. And then there's Arizona, Texas, and Harvard. But Texas tends to focus on engineering, for instance. So we've got this whole group of organizations that are developing transdisciplinarity, often in their own ways, but fundamentally making decisions of whether it can be additive of disciplines or whether it can transcend disciplines. And it's more of a not going above, or going above, it's much more transcending in a transcendental role of transdisciplinarity. There are a number of key centers. There's the International Center for Transdisciplinarity in Paris, which does accept members and writes some really interesting work. That's where Bazoab is, and that's the address that you're welcome to attend. There's a similar organization out of Brazil, which is a great hotbed of activity. I've had the pleasure of attending some of their meetings. There's the TDNet for transdisciplinarity. That's the Swiss setup. And then there's the Academy for Transdisciplinary Learning and Advanced Studies, which comes out of Texas. All of these also offer publications. Whilst all this is going on, and why this very important symposium is happening, there is also a third World Congress of Transdisciplinarity, which you can find details out by engaging with the website and finding that. It was a physical Congress, but it's been converted over the whole year because of the pandemic. So for me, an international view of transdisciplinarity offers up a number of questions, and I hope that these will be discussed in your meetings. Now, what are the real differences between interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, and why they're important? It seems to me that one is a progression and evolution, one is a radical change. Within all of that, we need to understand what we mean when we talk about knowledge and truth. We also need to understand what might practice and theory of transdisciplinary work to be, and how can we develop that in constructive and creative ways? What might the praxis of transdisciplinary look like? And really, it's just a step back. Well, would we know it before we see it? That seems to me to be the skills we need, is to be able to recognize how knowledges, a whole range of knowledges, not those that are enshrined in disciplines, can reveal truth to us, which has important impact on the way in which we are. And how should we talk about these issues? I was talking recently to a prof from Cornell University, who was arguing that transdisciplinarity should find another description. It should drop the word disciplinary so that it doesn't become another discipline. It transcends those whole notions. Einstein said, we can't solve problems by using the same thinking we use to create them. And that seems to me to be a nice closing sentence for why the work that you're doing and the work that Kate and her team are doing in Middlesex are incredibly important. We have too many problems that we need to solve than to start from the place that we created them. Thank you.